Prosecutor argued David went to the gym about 7 o'clock, then secretly ducked out of the basketball game, made the 5-minute drive home, killed his family, and returned to play ball. And the prosecutor had proof that David was home at the time of the murders. There was a call to a customer from his landline phone, time-stamped 7:19 p.m. So you got a husband who says, I was playing basketball at 7. You got a phone record that says he likely is making a call to a customer, landline, in his home, so he's not playing basketball.
Almost certainly would be the one that was doing it.
And that this phone call blows up his alibi.
Yes.
The prosecutor moved on to the crime scene and focused on what happened to Kim in the garage that night.
We thought the pants had been pulled down.
You've accused the husband of the murder. Why are you telling the jury that he probably pulled her pants down?
As part of a staged event.
Kim had not been raped, but the prosecutor argued her body appeared to have been moved, staged, and a cop would know how to do it.
Trying to get the jury to think that somebody was in there to molest her.
That there'd been a break-in guy, huh?
Yeah.
Investigators had never located the murder weapon. The only physical evidence the state had that the gun was in David Camm's hand that night was this: barely visible microscopic droplets of his daughter's blood on the lower left hem of Camm's T-shirt. How those drops of blood got there was the crux of the case. Blowback. This is what happens when you shoot somebody at close range.
Yes.
You get that blood on your shirt.
Correct. If you got high-velocity impact spatter on his T-shirt, he has to be within 4 feet of the child at the time that the child was killed.
The prosecution believed David Camm shot from inside the car, targeting Jill in the back seat. That's how her blood sprayed on his shirt. But why? Why would David Camm kill his family? The reason for those killings, the prosecutor declared, was that David Camm was a philandering husband.
It probably was one of the first times that I really ever heard Kim cry.
Remember Kim's old friend, Marcy McLeod? The prosecutor had her testify about an affair David had when Kim was pregnant in late 1994. Marcy told the court Kim called her in tears to say she and David were separating. Soon after, Marcy visited Kim.
She was upset, and saddened by it, especially just having a baby.
And there was more. Just 3 weeks before the murders, Marcy had another troubling phone call from Kim.
Her demeanor was different, her attitude, and she didn't want to hang up the phone, but yet she didn't want to talk.
The old friends made plans for Kim and the children to visit Marcy. Then Kim said something she never explained.
She felt like history was repeating itself. We didn't go into what that meant because she said, well, I'll talk about it when I get there.
Kim never made it. At trial, the clear implication was that David Camm was catting around again. The prosecutor portrayed him as a scoundrel who used his badge to get sex.
There's people he pulls over, flirts with them, and eventually seduces them.
In court, the prosecutor called a parade of women, presenting them as David Camm's conquests. More than a dozen of them recounting the fondling, the flirting, the sex, the stripper in the patrol car. He wanted to have women, and his wife was getting in the way.
Yes.
That she was an obstacle for the kind of lifestyle that he wanted to pursue. Huh?
That's correct.
And if the dalliances with the women weren't enough to suggest motivation to the jury, the prosecutor had a capper, something really dreadful. The medical examiner's testimony that injuries observed on the murdered daughter, 5-year-old Jill, were consistent with sexual abuse. So not a little girl falling on the monkey bars?
No, it wasn't monkey bars. Wasn't a bicycle. Anything like that.
So there was the prosecution's accused. Womanizer, child molester, the killer with blowback blood spatter on his T-shirt. The defense lawyers had their work cut out for them. You had an uphill fight as the defense attorney.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, and that's not unusual, but this one was just so much more high profile.
The timeline of the crime.
That was their smoking gun.
The defense is about to stop the clock. The trial of David Camm was underway in Floyd County, Indiana. It was the winter of 2002.
Nervous to see that those men and women will decide your fate?
David Camm, accused of murdering his wife and 2 young children, always insisted the case against him was built on quicksand.
It's about them crafting and molding a belief that was totally founded on things that weren't factual, and it was just a complete fiction.
David's defense attorney was Mike McDaniel, now deceased. He told us he had known David as a trooper. What impressions did you have of David before he became the client?
I figured he was another redneck state cop. We'd done a couple of cases, him on one side, me on the other.
But McDaniel became convinced of David's innocence and came on board to defend him.
This is one of those terrible cases that a defense lawyer never wants. You don't want an innocent client. You call them a ravager because they make you crazy.
At trial, McDaniel knew he had to confront all those women. But how? The defense could only flinch and take the body blows to Camm's character.
The jury's getting a picture of this hard-working wife, nose to the grindstone, taking care of the babies, running the household.
Yep.
While he's out with pole dancers.
Yep. On duty. You got 13 women coming in there with varying degrees of sexual contact or innuendo. Another trooper's wife, for God's sakes.
Not a good set of facts.
Not a good set of facts.
The defense pulled out potentially its strongest weapon and put David on the stand to say he knew that he'd messed up.
You know, I regret all of that stuff. It's so unfortunate, the disrespect that I showed my wife. But good God, we don't jump from that to saying that automatically makes a person a murderer. It's just ridiculous.
Then the defense had to confront the ugly allegation that 5-year-old Jill Camm had been molested. But in fact, the medical examiner's report had not actually said that. It simply stated the girl's bruises were the result of blunt trauma. The defense argued the bruises happened during the attack. Still, it was tough going.
We've got a guy who seems to have a lot of girlfriends. There may be some evidence here of child molestation. This is a very, very tough thing to combat, Dave.
It is. It's virtually impossible.
Having done its best to hammer the state's case for motive, the defense turned to the physical evidence. The state's strongest evidence, the forensic case for David's guilt, was the blood spatter. A defense expert testified the blood got on David's T-shirt very simply. When David reached into the back seat to move his son, his shirt brushed against his daughter's hair.
There were tiny droplets of blood on some of her hair around the wound. So defense testimony was that was transfer from that contact with the ends of the strands of her hair.
And then the timeline. The defense lawyer challenged the prosecution's theory that David snuck out in the middle of his basketball game, killed his family, and then returned to play ball. The defense attorney focused on the phone call made from the Camm house at 7:19 p.m. when David said he was at the church gym. The state had tethered its timeline to that phone call.
That was their smoking gun, which they had a bunch of those, and every time they have a smoking gun, we just unload it.
The defense unloaded by calling a witness from Verizon, who testified that its timestamp was incorrect because of Indiana's jumbled time zones.
So their 7:19 phone call actually was my 6:19 phone call.
A call David made to a client before he left to play ball. And even more important, David had a solid alibi. 11 eyewitnesses, the basketball players, to corroborate his story that he'd been at the gym throughout the early evening.
Did he leave the court that night?
No.
He couldn't have left without one of you guys.
Without one of us, because I would see him at one point in time running down the court, and then maybe Jeff would have saw him at another point in time. So throughout that time, there's 10 sets of eyes looking in different directions. As a group, I think someone would have noticed that he was missing.
Sam Lockhart, the uncle, was playing ball that night, too.
Sam, the basketball game, is it possible Dave could have slipped away?
Is it possible that he snuck out, was gone 10 or 15 minutes, killed his family, and snuck back in without any one of us noticing it? Absolutely not. That's impossible.
But if David wasn't the killer, then who was? The defense had its answer. It was the person who owned that gray sweatshirt, the one that was lying by Brad's body on the garage floor the night of the murders. Defense attorney Mike McDaniel had recognized the sweatshirt as prison issue.
In the collar of the sweatshirt is the word backbone. And I'm thinking, okay, that's a nickname.
Tests on that sweatshirt revealed DNA from various people, including an unknown male. But the prosecutor said there was no match when that male DNA was run through the national database. Still, it seemed to be a breakthrough for Team David, proof that someone else was in the garage that night.
We knew that that was probably the key to solving this. Now, we didn't know that person by name. By God, we knew him by DNA profile.
Finally, it was up to the jurors. As reporters lingered in the hallway, the jury deliberated for 3 days.
Guilty.
David Camm was found guilty of killing his wife and children.
Frank, the jury comes back and guilty as charged.
Yeah, that's what we wanted. And now we feel like, we can, Kim and Brangill, they can be at rest now.
But from David's sister, an emotional outburst.
Before I even knew it, I was standing up and I was screaming, "You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong." And a few people had to take me out of the courtroom.
And you're being walked off in chains. You're not leaving that courthouse.
Right. And knowing what lies ahead of me, going to prison, a former police officer. But there's absolutely nothing I can do about it.
David Camm was sent to the state penitentiary to serve a term of 195 years. But his Uncle Sam was hanging in.
You didn't think you were finished at that point?
Unless they had killed me, that's how they could have stopped me. They could have killed me. No, it wasn't over.
It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But not even Uncle Sam could predict the stunning turn that lay ahead. A break in the case. Someone new enters the picture.
As brainy as Ted Bundy and as brawny as Mike Tyson. He's a sociopath.
Who is this guy?
Hey guys, Willie Geist here. This week on the Sunday Sit Down Podcast, I get together with one of the biggest artists in the history of music, Shania Twain. Get our conversation now for free, wherever you download your podcasts.
In early 2002, David Camm was found guilty on 3 counts of murdering his wife and 2 children. His sentence, 195 years behind bars.
You've been sent to the slammer that you're going to do time in.
Right. Yeah. Ultimately,
you're learning how to become incarcerated.
I had to. I didn't have a choice. I had to figure out how to survive. And I made my mind up early on. That's what I was going to do, whatever it took.
Did you get confronted inside the joint? This is the guy that was a former cop, trooper?
Not directly, but people would say things, or you would hear people talking and so on.
Did you think I'm done?
You know what? I was just bewildered at first, but I didn't know that there was still a possibility or some glimmer of hope that there's this thing called an appeal.
A successful appeal, another trial. Most convicts cling futilely to that straw.
Overturning a first-degree murder conviction, long odds.
Yes.
Until you read that transcript.
A new team of attorneys, Kitty Lyle and Stacy Uliana, took the case to the State Court of Appeals.
And then it wasn't long odds, in my mind. Because it was way over the top.
What was over the top, they argued, was allowing all those women to testify to the sex, the groping, the come-ons.
It was weeks after weeks, woman after woman.
How is that relevant to what happened on September 28th?
Jurors, this is a bad guy we've got here.
Absolutely.
He's a louse of a husband, and we're going to tell you more than that.
That was intentional, too.
And guess what? 2 years after the guilty verdict, the appeals court agreed. The women should never have been permitted to testify. The conviction was overturned. But the victory was short-lived. A new prosecutor announced there would be a second trial.
After review of the previous evidence and review of some new evidence that has come to light, I've decided to pursue the charges against David Camm for the murders of Kimberly Camm, Bradley Camm, and Jill Camm.
With another trial looming, the defense team was intent on bringing sharply into focus a piece of evidence it believed would set David free. The gray sweatshirt with that unknown male DNA. Back in 2001, the prosecutor said there'd been no match when the DNA was run through a national criminal database. But Sam Lockhart says he approached the new investigators to run it through again.
They wouldn't even want to talk to me. I wanted to show them the unknown DNA. I said, in case that this guy had been arrested now and you got new DNA on this data bank, would you run this? No, we can't take it.
Then the attorneys try. They ask the prosecutor.
We start saying, please run the DNA through the data bank. Please do it. And he refused.